Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. So today I've got this Stihl BG56C blower and it's not running, and I was told that when you pull start it, sometimes the recoil starter will lock up and other times fuel will come out of the muffler. So we'll set the choke and give it a couple pulls and see what happens. And it just locked up. And that exhaust pipe is extremely wet. So I'm not going to mess with this thing other than to replace the carburetor. You could try to clean it, but I found with these little carburetors, you can buy them off eBay for $25. So I just replace them. So let's go do that. So here's what this thing's doing when you try to start it. It's spewing a ton of gas out. You can see it on the rocks. Look at that. That's pure gas coming out that exhaust. So that's not going to start. Okay, so here we are inside the shop, and the reason that recoil is locking up is that carburetor is allowing fuel to just flow through it into the cylinder of this machine, and then that is causing a hydrolock. So when you're pulling it, fuel won't compress like air does. So that brings that piston to a screeching halt, basically, which can jar your arm. The other thing it does is it continues to feed fuel into the head, which then allows it to start running out the exhaust pipe. And this thing's been dripping gas since I brought it in here, so I'm gonna hurry up and get it pulled apart and get this carburetor replaced. Here's the carburetor that I'm gonna be using to replace it. It came from Stihl, I think is how that's pronounced. It's a Chinese company. Some people don't wanna maybe use Chinese parts. I'm not sure that you'll find any others, maybe the OEM on these, but this isn't a commercial leaf blower from Stihl. It's a homeowner quality one. But for $25, we can get it repaired and get several more years out of it. This thing's probably been around here about 10 years now. So let's get into it. We're gonna start by taking the air cleaner off. That's pretty easy. And it doesn't really look too bad in there. We'll go ahead and pull the element out. Pull that little piece off. And we get the element off. Now we've got two 10mm nuts that are going to hold that air filter and carburetor in. So the next step we've got is this thing takes 10mm, make sure that's right. Yeah, it takes a 10mm socket for these two nuts, and then everything else on this is T25. So we're going to go ahead and take off this orange cover. I believe there are 3 of these bolts. There are. Now we can take this cover off. Okay, and there's our recoil starter. And you can see there's nothing wrong with that starter. It's the hydrolock inside this little cylinder that's causing that to bind up. So there's a lot of gunk on this. So this thing, I'm gonna guess it's about 10 years old, and it gets used pretty hard in the fall, but otherwise it just sits. With this amount of dirt, there's probably equal amount of dirt inside. That's another reason I'm not gonna mess with changing this carburetor. Now this bulb here, it actually is in good shape. It doesn't leak or anything. So the new carburetor has a new primer bulb on it. So we'll take care of that as well. Okay, and the next thing that we've got to do, because we've got to take this throttle linkage off. So I think we can pull this, and there's that, it's dripping gas even still. So let's go ahead and take these 3 screws out and get a look at that throttle. I need my little magnetic bolt. You get one here in a second. Okay, so we'll take this cover off. Our throttle fell out. We can take loose our linkage right there. And then I've got a new spark plug. I think I'll go ahead and pull this off. Okay, so that spark plug boot has actually got this rubber piece built into it. And our kit from Hutzel, I guess, our kit from Hutzel has a new spark plug in it as well as a new air filter element. So we're going to take this linkage off, and now our carburetor is ready to come off. And we're starting to get a lot of little screws, so I went ahead and got my magnetic bowl. Sometimes when you go to do this, you'll find out that these screws aren't magnetic. Luckily, these are. It still makes a decent place to put them, but it's just kind of funny when you expect to have magnetic screws in a magnetic bowl and they're not. Okay, so these carb screws actually are 8mm. I thought they were 10 before I really looked at them. And I'm just going to use this nut driver to take these screws off. And we'll drop them in a magnetic bowl. Okay, now this piece should just lift off, and it did. Again, that is some grimy, that's some grimy equipment there. So next, this should just slide off. And it's been on there a day or two. Might take a little bit. There we go. And I have, it looks like, 2 fuel lines going into it. Okay, so we've got a fuel line in front at the top and another one at the back in the bottom. And what I do is I usually just try and take a screwdriver and bust that loose a little bit. And with all this plastic, we'll try not to break anything else. Then once I get it, I think, broken loose, just take a needle nose pliers and pry it on out. There we go. So there's the top one. I'm just going to pull it off the studs. We've got a gasket right there. And then I'll take the bottom one off. I'm going to leave that gasket on there. Hopefully the new one comes with a new gasket. And the same thing, pry against the body of the carburetor, just to kind of break that seal. There it went. Okay, now I should just be able to grab it with the needle nose and pull it the rest of the way off. And the trick to this is making sure that you know which one was which when you put it back together. So that is one seriously dirty carburetor. I'm not sure I've ever seen one that bad. But that's just on the outside. The inside may not be too bad. But I'm sure what's happened is probably the gas has made one of the seals in there, or one of the gaskets, brittle, and it's no longer keeping the fuel from just flowing through it. So if this was like a motorcycle carburetor, it would be basically the needle seat has failed, is my thought. Okay, so we'll open up our maintenance kit, they call it, and that's because it's more than just a carburetor. So here's the part we really are looking for, is the carburetor. Now it's got a new spark plug. It has a new fuel filter that goes in the tank, and it's got a new air filter element, and there's our gaskets. We've also got a little bit of fuel line. I think these lines are okay for now, but if I need to, I'll switch them. What I have found with some of these Chinese carburetors, this is like the 3rd or 4th one I put on, sometimes those little hose barbs are not the same size as what was the OEM was, in which case you do have to change to this fuel line because the other one is too fat and it'll leak. And then we've got a small carburetor adjusting tool. Okay, and here's our orientation of our new Chinese carburetor. And it has 2 new gaskets in it. They're exactly the same. I put it on like this to line the holes up, and it fit. And then I flipped it over and I lined it up like that, and the holes fit. So that's kind of nice. Can't hardly get that wrong. Okay, so I'm going to start by putting the gasket on the carburetor studs. Next, I'm going to take the bottom fuel line and put it into our brass port that's at the bottom far side of the carburetor. And I'm just going to slide it up. And like I was saying about those hoses, sometimes these Chinese carburetors have a smaller barb on them. This one seems to be the exact same size because that hose fit nice and tight, and I'm confident it will not leak. So now we'll slide the carburetor actually onto the studs. At this time, no reason not to go ahead and just put the top hose on. And I'll use my little vice grips or my little needle nose pliers to go ahead and push that on. There we go. And again, that's not going to leak. That fit nice and snug, and that's what we want. Okay, I've got one more gasket here someplace. I didn't put them both on there, did I?
I didn't see you put them both on there.
Ah, here it is. Okay, there's our second gasket, and we'll put that over the carburetor studs. Again, I can't tell a difference where there's upside down, right side, or left or right, whatever. Seems like no matter how you put that on there, if you put those two bolts through those two holes, it's gonna work. Here's our new air filter element, and looking at that old air filter element, we'll go ahead and use the new one. Basically free. Again, this kit, if I didn't say it, this one actually came from Amazon. I got looking, and from Amazon, this was $25 for all this. Now that I've wiped the worst of the grime off of our air filter case, go ahead and slide that back on there. Gasket on, I had to double check. I couldn't remember if I put gasket on there. Okay, so there's our two studs are through the air cleaner housing. Now we'll put our two nuts that we've got in our handy magnetic bowl. All right, with our nut right there. This is one place where a deeper socket is going to hurt you. So we'll put our nut right in the end of our socket and see if we can get it to start. There, it just did. Okay, and we'll snug these up. At this point, I'll go ahead and put my air filter element back on. Okay, now we need to put the throttle linkage back on. Okay, our throttle linkage goes back down in the connect to the throttle. And if you forgot how that went, like I said, it's a good idea to take a picture before you take it apart. One of the reasons it's kind of a blessing this thing was so dirty, look how dirty that end is versus that end. That tells me this is the end by that nasty carburetor. And it just slips right in. When we go to put our trigger assembly back together, we've got the plastic trigger, we've got the little pin, and that goes in, and that's the ground wire for the kill switch. So make sure that you get that ground wire in this pin, or you won't be able to turn this off. So the trigger, obviously if you pull it this way, it goes onto the pin right there. Okay, and that's going to work. So now we just put the linkage back in the trigger. Now we can go ahead and put our cap back on, our spark plug. And I'm just going to go ahead and keep using the stock spark plug because it's an NGK and I kind of trust it a little more than the one that came in the carburetor kit. All right, so now we can put our exterior handle on, and remember that took 3 screws. On these screws, if you remember, or if you don't, the smaller heads are for the top handle, and the bigger heads are for the big orange case for the recoil starter. And again, this is a T25. And you just want to snug those down. You don't want to rip the plastic out of the thing with the threads. And you can do it with these power tools, so be careful. Okay, so that's plenty snug. Our next step will be to put the recoil starter back on. So this just goes in. Obviously the gap goes for the spark plug. There we go. Fit in. Now we'll put our 3 screws back in this. These magnetic bowls definitely come in handy. Okay, and our last screws here at the bottom. Okay, when you're putting those screws in, remember that that power tool can strip that plastic out pretty quick, so be careful when you're doing that. Ease into it. You probably should tighten those by hand as a final tighten. Our last step, I'm gonna wipe this out, is to put our air filter cover back on. And then the ultimate test, we'll see if it'll start. I'm pretty confident it will. Okay, final steps, putting our air filter cover back on. There we go. So once that's pushed in, turn the lock. All right, let's see if it'll start. Okay, the way this starts is you pull the trigger and then you set it on choke, then you release the trigger. That keeps it on choke. Now, the kill switch, I love kill switches like this. It's spring loaded. So you don't ever have to worry about accidentally leaving it on shut off, basically. I remember the motorcycles we used to ride had a key switch and also a kill switch. And it always bugged the crap out of me when somebody would turn off your kill switch, because I only ever used the key. Anyway, so now then, we've got it set to choke. We're gonna use the primer. And it's filling with gas. What I read on this, it said to push it 10 times. I'm not sure if that's necessary or not, but we'll try it out. Okay, now we'll get ready to pull the rope. All right, we're gonna throw a little gas in there. And I just had this chainsaw gas, but it's got stable in it, and it's got oil in it. Okay, let's see if we can start it up and see if it'll run. Right. So that's our Stihl BG56C leaf blower video, and we put that Chinese carburetor that we got off Amazon for $25 on there, and that took care of the problem. The whole bottom end of that motor was full of gas, so I did dump that out before we got starting it. But after that, put a little fresh gas in it, and she's running like a champ. All right, so thanks a lot for watching. If you liked this video, give us a thumbs up. Have a great day, and be safe. Well, you think that'll work?
Yeah, I think it'll work.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, it was an easy fix. We just put a new Chinese carburetor in there, so.
Well, as long as it runs.
It's running now. That's better than it was when we got it.
Oh, I'll be able to start it in the morning. All you got to do is hold your hand back here.
Uh-huh.
That carburetor, that's on.
Yep.
And it flips it off.
Yep.
It was out of gas. That thing, it didn't mill the line, did it?
No, the whole bottom end and muffler was full of fuel. So I had to take the spark plug out and drain all that gas out of the bottom of the motor.
Yeah.
So, that's why it was out of gas in the gas tank. It all flowed through the motor and out the carb.
Because I filled that thing, because I remember thinking to myself when I filled it, I said, damn, I didn't run it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But I had to refill it, and I said, I didn't pay any attention.
Yeah, it all leaked right out the muffler, and that muffler was still full, and so was the bottom end of that motor. So I just took the spark plug out and blew air through it and blew all that old gas out of there. And like I said, put the new carburetor on it, and it started right up.
Well, I'm tickled to death to have it back.
Yep.
I was going to buy a new one.
Yeah, and I ain't no sense in that. $25, take care of it.
Yeah, I bet you $300.
It's about 10 years old, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Every bit of that.
Okay. Well,
and it's good.
Right.
But not near as good as that other blower.
Yeah, the backpack one.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, she's back in business, so you're set to go probably another 10 years with it.
I'll be tickled.